You can click away. And I see you clicking away. Very good. So Dan Kenary I spoke with him just minutes ago, and of course he hit traffic on the Mass Pike coming from Fort Point Channel. And we have someone waiting at the bottom of Fulton Hall to take his car and park it for him so that he can come right upstairs. So he should be here any second. So go back to having your conversations. So have they been ordered already?
No, I called them on Friday, and they said, no, thank you. Yeah, just as long as you get the green button.
Volume.
We're
Drunk
good?
IPA.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, and for those of you who may not have heard it, if you have an iClicker and you haven't clicked it yet, click anytime you want, okay? It's running and ready to go. Okay, so we are just on time, basically. Welcome to the first session of the Manager Studio for the 2014-2015 school year. We're very excited to have our guest today, Dan Kenary, the CEO and co-founder of the company. And the way this works, for those of you who have not been through one of these before, I have about a 45-minute interview. I'll ask some questions of Dan, and then I'll turn it over to you to ask questions for the last 45 minutes. We'll be having a reception down in the lobby of Fulton Hall on the first floor afterwards for about 30 minutes if you want to come and meet him and say hello. So let us begin. I want to begin by giving you a little background on Dan and his company. Dan is the co-founder and CEO of Harpoon Brewery. As I said, he graduated with Rich Doyle, the co-founder of the company, from Harvard in 1982 with a degree in American history. He earned an MBA from the University of Chicago in 1985 while working at the First National Bank of Chicago. Dan left the bank in 1986 to co-found the Harpoon Brewery with Rich. During a 6-year hiatus from the brewery, Dan worked as chief financial officer at 2 biotech firms in the Boston area while remaining active on the board of Harpoon. He has served on the Institute of Brewing Studies Board of Advisors as a director and treasurer of Save the Harbor, Save the Bay, a local environmental advocacy organization, president of the Boston Marine Business Association, and president of the Massachusetts Brewers Guild. He also serves on the executive committee of the Associated Industries of Massachusetts and has recently been elected vice president, North America, of the newly formed Global Association of Craft Beer Brewers. In August 2014, he oversaw Harpoon Brewery's transition to employee stock ownership with the establishment of an employee stock ownership program. Originally from Worcester, he lives in Wellesley, Massachusetts with his wife and 4 children. Just a little bit of information on the company. In 1986, Dan and Rich founded Harpoon Brewery, and the company was issued Brewing Permit 001 by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, since it was the first commercial brewery in Boston after a dormant period of about 25 years. Harpoon's line of craft beer features its award-winning IPA and UFO beers, none of which is in the room with us right now, unfortunately, along with special seasonal selections, and is currently the 12th largest craft brewer in the U.S. The company has 187 employees, and its locations in Boston and Vermont, and it expects to sell about 210,000 barrels of beer in 2014. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dan Kenary. Thank you. So I want to begin the interview by talking a little bit about your career and the path that you took to end up in this position today as the CEO of the company. One of the articles the students in my classes read is a commencement speech from Steve Jobs where he says, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backward. When you look backward on the path that you've taken to end up in this position today, are there any notable experiences along the way that helped you end up in this role that you're in today?
Well, I could start with the first time my early beer drinking experiences, I suppose, but that wouldn't be entirely true. It's a great point by Steve Jobs, and it's so true. And I have 4 children, ages 19 to 25, so in the zone here, and so I'm paying a lot of attention these days to career decisions and issues, and I think it's always fascinating. I'm sure you would agree with this, Bob, when you talk to people, and there are these forks in the road that at the time you really don't know how significant they are. And you look back and say, my goodness, I've ended up here because this fork in the road, and I didn't, it was serendipity, or so-and-so said something to me, and I said, sure, I'll try it, or I met someone, or whatever it is. You know, I had traveled in Europe. I'd been lucky enough to do kind of the grand tour thing after college and go for 2 months backpacking throughout Europe. And back in the 70s and 80s, the American beer scene was absolutely dismal. You could go coast to coast, and it was all yellow lagers. There was very little choice. So as someone who really liked to drink beer, went to Europe, and you come into these little towns and you see, my gosh, there's a brewery, and they make this different beer we've never heard of, and these styles, colors, aromas, etc. It was an eye-opener. And I remember coming back here after that trip and just saying, you know, the United States is the most developed consumer market in the world, yet our beer choices are miserable. And you would talk to people, and they'd say, yeah, it really sucks, doesn't it? But what are you going to do about it? So when I was in banking, as Bob said, at First National Bank of Chicago, and I was getting my MBA at night at University of Chicago, and came back to Boston with the bank, and Rich just called me up, and he and I had met freshman year in college, and he said, gosh, I'm doing this research report on microbrewing, which is what the industry was known as at that time, and it was just getting going out in the Pacific Northwest. He said, I'm really considering turning this report into a business plan. He and I drank a lot of beer together. He says, I know you like beer. What do you think about opening a brewery in Boston? I had also spent time at the bank with the First Chicago Venture Capital Group analyzing business plans, so I had some experience with that. And it was just the right time at the right place where I knew I wanted to get out of banking, and I actually had applied to PhD programs. I'd been admitted to Stanford and Northwestern and offered some money to go get my PhD in American history. So when you talk about a guy that was all over the map career-wise, I had a lot, and I still do have a lot of interests. And so I looked into money management, getting a PhD in American history, or opening a brewery. And talking to Rich, you know, it appealed to me, again, that sense that, gee, it was starting to happen with coffee. Bob and I would remember when Maxwell House and Folgers were kind of the choices, and then Dunkin' Donuts came along, like, wow, Dunkin' Donuts makes good coffee. But Starbucks was just getting started. The Coffee Connection in Boston had just opened. So we started to see it with ice cream, coffee, where Americans were demonstrating a willingness to try different things and pay more money for it. So I said, gee, beer, I love it. I know how excited I was going to Europe and drinking these wonderful styles. I jumped at it. I was single, you know, no kids. It was a great time in life to take a risk. So we went out and we turned Rich's research report into a business plan and raised $430,000 from 35 individuals, friends and family, and we just followed the money until we raised it. And, you know, again, looking back, people today have such knowledge of what craft beer is. And when I tell you stories about going into bars in Allston, Brighton, Cityside at the Circle, I mean, and trying to explain to them what this was, this brown, what is this brown foofy stuff, this micro-brewed crap you guys are trying to sell? People had no idea what we were doing. So we had to educate them as to, no, beer doesn't have to be pale yellow and clear. It can be all these other things. And I never would have dreamed that in one generation we would go from the United States really being the least developed beer market in the industrialized world to being by far and away the best place in the world to be a beer drinker. It's wonderful.
So oftentimes, successful people have had notable failures or disappointments along the way that really help to clarify the direction they're going to go in. Are there any stories you can share from your own experience like that?
Absolutely. You know, and I think I'm better. My dad, he's 86. He still goes to work 2 mornings a week. He's had one job since he graduated from college in 1950 in the financial services business. And I realized after a while that he was probably not the right one for me to talk to because he'd never changed jobs, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like a lot of you, I would assume, in this room, the world looks exciting, but it's a little bit scary because you say, gee, I see these guys up here doing what they're doing, and how do I get from A to B on this thing? So I not only had it at that time when I knew I wanted to leave the bank, but then again when I left Harpoon. So we grew Harpoon in the first 4 years to about $1 million business, and there were 3 founders actually. George Ligeti was the 3rd partner in starting the business. Kind of like the Kremlin used to do. We kind of airbrushed him out for a few years because it just got complicated to explain it. But 3 of us, $1 million in revenue, break even or losing money. We couldn't afford to have the 3 of us in the business. So we made the decision that 1 would stay and 2 would go. George left the area, moved to Seattle, then Florida. So I stayed on the board active with Rich, but I left. So I went off into biotech. And there were times there again, so I'm, 8 years out of college where I'm on my third job. How am I weaving this all together? And then I actually had a great, CFO position at a biotech company, and Rich came knocking saying, he actually came knocking twice, but the second time I said, I'll talk to you seriously about this. So I was in a situation of kind of wondering, what am I doing? Am I wasting my time here in my career and not establishing what I want? But you look back on, you realize I was much more valuable to Harpoon when I came back in late 95, early 96, because of that CFO experience I'd had in biotech. They were venture capital-backed companies, so they actually like to spend a lot of money and train and go to conferences. And so I was exposed to a lot of different things in that role that I then took back with me. And as I tell my kids or people when I'm interviewing them, around 30, 35, it's as long as you can weave a story together where you're building an experience base and you do whatever that job is really, really well. That's all that matters. You do it really well, you learn something from it. One of the biotech jobs I had, the guy ended up, I'll tell this little story because it's kind of
Sure,
talk about career challenges. So the CEO, one of the founders of the company, he was vice president of research and development. He's in the business. Those of us, 2 or 3 of us, other senior managers in the company, knew that he was a little bit, there was some things not right about him, as a person, as a manager. And so we went out to San Francisco, the CEO of the company and myself and this VP of R&D, with the CEO going to the chairman of the board, the venture capitalist, saying, I want to fire this VP of R&D. He's unmanageable, et cetera. Well, make a long story short, the chairman of the board said to the CEO, no, we're going to fire you, and we're going to make this guy CEO. They made this guy CEO. When I say it was a dysfunctional environment, it's an understatement. So I stayed on for a few months and then transitioned out as quickly as I could. Several years later, when I was back at Harpoon, I landed at Logan Airport. I remember getting to the car on a Saturday, and BZ News was on, and it started out, Wenham police have arrested Gloucester doctor. And I finished the sentence. That guy who'd been made CEO had just killed his wife and was put in prison and ended up committing suicide. So I relate that story not just for the shock value, but I learned a ton in that environment because it was a dysfunctional environment. And some of us had to hold the company together despite this guy who the venture capitalists thought, hey, he's the brilliant scientist. He can get this company public. We can make a lot of money. Those of us in the company trying to manage day in and day out had some real challenges with him. But again, nothing's really seemed that strange in business since I worked in that environment. So.
Okay, I would agree. So I have 2 related questions. The first is about the individuals in your life who have had the biggest impact on you and in terms of guiding and directing, your path. The second is related to mentors and people you've learned a lot from along the way. It might be the same people, though, too. So,
I actually gave this a little thought coming over here because it's an interesting question, and it's a question that's often asked, and I'm not going to give that unusual answer. I was blessed with a mother and father who gave me a foundation, both personally and in business, with my father especially, that have served me incredibly well. And I think, and when I look back on it, I've certainly worked with some wonderful people, but it's mostly for me people that I learned from growing up. The summer, as I said, my parents, summer jobs, some teachers, and I think part of that is because those are your formative years. And you also, I'm a big believer in summer work and doing all kinds of things in summer jobs. My kids have worked on our trucks. I worked on farms. I've done a lot of different things. And I think the reason I found it so valuable is you're around all sorts. You're not just around the MBAs or the people with suits and ties on. You're around some really hardworking, wonderful, honest people who kind of teach you the values that are going to stay with you no matter what you're doing. And I think in life, values are the things that are important as opposed to specific experience.
I love that answer, by the way. My students know why. I want to switch a little bit to how you manage your organization and leadership and management skills. The question is, how did you develop them? And what are some of the most important lessons you've learned along the way?
I'll tell you, the lessons that stay with me are the simple ones. I think when folks try to overcomplicate it, it's when you should probably kind of, say time out here. In our company, the simplest management rule going back is treat others as you like to be treated yourself. And, when you're trying to motivate an individual or motivate a group of individuals, you know, you're not doing it with a ruler or putting people down. You're really doing it by lifting people up, right? It doesn't mean that everyone's a right fit for your culture, for your company. They're not. And you owe it to the good people to get rid of the bad people. And fortunately at Harpoon, we have a very strong culture, and the culture tends to reject people. It's not like I have to go and say, hey, that kid there should be fired from the company. I know JR, that's why I'm picking on him. That doesn't have to happen. People around come and say, you know, so-and-so doesn't pull their weight, they're not honest, whatever it is. The culture tends to reject folks. So motivating for us, it's largely a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. And so we'd rather give positive feedback to folks. You build up credibility that way with people when you actually point out positive things that they've done and thank them for it. So then when you say, hey, in this area you've really kind of let me down a little bit, you'll be better if you could actually do this in a different way. I think they're more open to that kind of criticism. Leadership, you know, you can't just talk about it. You have to do it. And we fortunately work at a company where we're able to do a lot of different things. We do a lot of different things together. This weekend is our Oktoberfest celebration, for example. Last year we had 19,000 people there. What that does for us internally, we view it as an opportunity. We have job applicants come and work that event. And then we throw great parties after the event for the staff that's worked the event. And we talk about the people that have come and worked. So we have like 3 or 4 outside sales guys potentially coming in and working this event. And it'll be like, you know what, if they're not willing to sweep up with you afterwards with a good attitude and they're not fun to have a beer with after the event, they don't belong here. I mean, that might sound simple, but you take a festival like this where everybody in the company comes together. It's a great way to evaluate whether someone feels a certain job might be beneath them. Because, you know, if I started the company, I've done every job. There's no job at the brewery that should be beneath anybody.
Right. So you've been involved with Harpoon for 28 years, is that right? What have you learned about what it takes to run and build a company like this?
Well, I tell you, I think back to starting the company, it's amazing how little we knew. And I don't think you would start businesses if you actually knew how little you know, which is a good thing, which is why it's a young person's thing to do. I think certain things people say that you kind of say goes in one ear and out the other, and folks talk about the importance of hiring, making great hiring decisions, and how difficult it is to make great hiring decisions, but how incredibly important it is. And it's crucial to your business. You know, if Red Auerbach used to have a line about, you know, don't give me the best center, give me the best athlete, I'll train him into the best center or point guard or whatever you need. And we kind of take that attitude in a lot of our hiring. We're fortunate to be in an industry where we attract overqualified people. It's like, hey, it's a crap brewery, it's in Boston, what's wrong with that, right? I have a MBA from BC, but I'll go sell Harpoon in Connecticut because I think this would be a fun thing to do. And I'd learn, and selling to me is incredibly important, great training in any kind of business. So we'll get overqualified folks, and we'll just train them to do different jobs, and it's very effective for us. But there's nothing more important than the kind of people that you attract and the people that you're able to retain.
So you have quite a history here with this company. Can you describe what is the culture of Harpoon, and what aspects are you trying to foster as you move forward?
Well, you know, you alluded to it earlier, because I think it's kind of the culmination of what our culture is. This summer when we announced the ESOP, the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, the motto of our business is love beer, love life, and it's kind of how we present ourselves and how we try to run our business. And I think if we weren't who we say we are, it would become pretty apparent to people over time. But we have a very inclusive culture where people already had a sense of ownership. So we were confronted with the decision, you know, Rich and I were, as I said at the time we announced this, you know, we're approaching the mid-50s. It's a legitimate question for people to be asking, you know, hey, what do you think Rich and Dan are going to do with the business? And we decided to answer it in this fashion. There are a number of craft breweries that are selling to other multinational breweries that are selling a lot of private equity deals going on today. And it's always important to know when you read a private equity deal that it is the first step towards a sale to a strategic partner. the private equity guys don't get into the deal unless it's either going public or selling to a strategic partner. So there's really no way to maintain your independence in that environment. We decided to really double down on staying an independent craft brewery by we're giving 48% of our company to our employees. So it was a very fun night at the brewery when we made that announcement. I invited like a half dozen strangers in suits, as I call them, because we don't have many people in suits at Harpoon, to kind of come and stand on the edge of our beer hall. We had this company-wide meeting. We bussed people down from Vermont, and I said, I'm here to introduce you to the new owners of a large minority stake in Harpoon. And people have never been more attentive than that night. That a lot of them didn't even have beers in their hand. They really were listening and are looking around nervously. And I picked on like 7 people that said, please stand up. And I said, please turn to the person next to you and shake their hand. You're the new owners of the company. And the place just kind of erupted. But that's kind of who we are as a company. And for me, being in a position with all these wonderful folks to have created what we've created and now to share it with them. And we've got folks with all kinds of backgrounds, some didn't go to college, this or that. And to say to those people that now you have the potential for some real financial security, you can maybe think about that little house on the Cape or that boat or that. I mean, what's better than that, right? Versus giving that money to a private equity investor or some strange brewery from some foreign country. So
Now
it's a great thing.
You may have just answered the next question I want to ask, because you've given 48% of this company's stock to the employees. Your product is beer. Motivating your workforce, is it difficult to motivate them, and is there anything special you need to do?
It's not. We're very, very competitive. It's I don't know. It's kind of in our DNA. It's Rich and I, George. It's the senior management group. We're a very competitive company, and you benchmark yourselves against. It's been frustrating, but we've benefited from being in the same town as Sam Adams because they're the gold standard in our industry. They've made us better. As much as at times I want to punch Jim Cook's face in. I'm kidding. But they've made us better as a company. So, we really are, we're very, very competitive, and we're in an incredibly competitive industry. So we have a lot of fun. And I say this to some, potential new hires walking around. It might appear relaxed here, and it's fun, but you don't get into the circle of folks at this company unless you really, really work hard. And not only work hard at your own job, but if something needs doing, you step up and offer to do it. Once you demonstrate that that's the kind of attitude you have, do I care if you're sitting around with someone else and having a beer at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? I don't. I might join you.
Okay. So a lot of CEOs have sat in that seat, and there's a consistent theme, which is that communicating is a challenging thing, because no matter how much you do it, it's never good enough. It's never clear enough. And you have to deal with your employees, and you have to deal with the senior team and a board. What do you find has worked particularly well or not well in terms of communicating with all these constituencies?
It's a real challenge, and it can be very frustrating at times. I'll give you a live example from today. So we set this ESOP up this summer, and it's all full-time employees are eligible. Okay? Part-time employees are not eligible, just the way that it's structured. And in our beer hall, in our Riverbend Taps up in Vermont, which is our retail beer garden outlet, we have a number of part-timers. Now, most of these part-timers are teachers, or they're putting themselves through school or something, so they're part-timers for a reason. And over the last year, I think we've hired 14 of them and made them full-timers. We have a repeated issue that keeps coming up of frustration expressed by these part-timers that they're not in the ESOP, and they feel the ESOP is being kind of thrown in their face. Now, I spent time explaining this, and they've asked me to come to another meeting with all of them in a couple of weeks to kind of talk about it again. And at some point, you just say, I'm done. So, and then you identify who's having the problem with understanding what you're saying, and you got to go after that. That's a sign of maybe a little bit of a cultural problem. But communication, it's very hard to ever over-communicate. And we're announcing some, management changes next week. And for example, within a department, I said, you guys should get the whole department together so they actually hear about it, everyone hears the same story. So even in a relatively small company, you have real challenges with stories kind of transmuting as they get down in the organization. So you hear stuff back that you say, where did that ever come from? So we try to do, newsletter, regular company meetings, over-communicate, 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 but it's never a settled issue.
So this is a timely question because of some management changes that you're announcing next week. If you're looking for a new member of your senior management team, what do you look for? How do you determine they're going to be a good fit with your team?
Culture and character, the first two things you have to try to judge, and that gets into personalities. And we were, it's not just hiring a senior manager. We're considering entering into a business relationship with another firm, and I made it very clear. They kept saying, we can really make money at this. We can really make money at this. And I'm like, we wouldn't be doing this if we couldn't make money at it. But I actually want to talk to you about you and your family and who you guys are, and what's this going to be like doing business with you? So I'm going to want to do reference checks on you to find out what kind of people you are. Because life, to me, is one of the great things about running your own business is you don't have to work with, you can finish the sentence.
Blank.
Life is too short to work with blank. It really is. And when you're going out there and looking for work, check out the kind of people that are at the company. You spend a lot of your time there. You spend a lot of your time at work. And so if you're working with people who are not ethical, who aren't the kind of people you'd like to go out for a beer or a cup of coffee with, you should probably look at another opportunity. And so we do, in hiring for senior level people, you check on the qualifications, that they can do what the job requires. But really for us, the more important part is, are they a fit with our culture?
Perfect. You're giving the perfect answers according to everything
He
they're
did not
learning in
prompt
the
me.
classroom. How do you spend your time at work? Is there such a thing as a typical day or a typical week for you?
It's changed. It's changed this summer, because when we did the ESOP, my partner Rich left, and we had run the company where he ran sales and marketing, and I ran operations and finance. So for 15 years, I kind of had more of a set schedule. Since then, since I've taken everything on, I find that I'm in meetings a lot more. Part of it is because of the transition, some things were changing, so we have to do that. I need to actively reflect on how my job needs to change. I think that as a senior manager, one of the phrases, a to not do list is an incredibly important thing to have. If you're advancing in your career, if at least once a year you're not going through your list of things and ways you're spending your time and saying these 3, 4, 5, 6 things have got to go, then you're not doing your job right. So part of it for me is not just waiting for the transition to happen. I've got to make that transition happen. And I have to understand that, I'm on stage every single day with all of our people, internally, and then when I'm going out to meet wholesalers or retailers. And I don't mean that to inflate believe me, I could never get away with that. I'm not interested in it. But people are looking to me for signs, sense of, hey, how's the business? How you feeling? Are things upbeat? And you need to realize that as an executive, that people are kind of keying off you. So I spend a lot of time in meetings and just in talking to people. I think there's some value to the old saying, management by walking around. I don't do enough of it, but to get out into the brewery and see people, I make it a point typically every 2 weeks to go and spend a day or two up at our Vermont brewery with folks up there. And I'm forcing myself to get out into the trade more to spend time with wholesalers and retailers and with our salespeople in those markets.
So what part of your job do you like the most, and what part do you like the least?
Well, if this was a beer, I could answer that question. I could do a show and tell. I would have to say that people would be the answer to both of those questions, right? I enjoy, we have just a bunch of great people at Harpoon. I love spending time with our people. We have a lot of fun together. One of the reasons I was pushing so hard to do this ESOP is that it's a pretty cool thing to be running your own business. And I would never want to give that up lightly, not just to be selfish about it, but the board of directors are 2 outside people that I've known for 30 to 35 years who are in each other's weddings, great old friends who are very successful in their own right, who give me great advice. But to be able to kind of run a business with people who you really like and respect is a great thing to be able to do, right? So, but occasionally, we have problems with people. And you have to fire people. You have to deal with situations where people do stupid things. And so that's kind of a crummy part of the job. You got to do it. I always gear myself up for those decisions by saying I owe it to the good people. You owe it to the good people to get rid of the bad ones. And it's your job to confront that and to say to someone, you know what, you're fired. You don't belong here anymore. I'm sorry. We've given you every opportunity. We've been very fair to you, but you're done. So we had one of those situations not that long ago. One of our guys, a very kind of mild-mannered guy you'd never expect to do this, basically left the brewery, went out and had way too much to drink and came back. This is late night, and acted inappropriately. And said, you know, we have a special responsibility in our industry to treat our product and other alcoholic products responsibly. And so he's gone.
Well, so you mentioned meetings are a big part of your life. What is it like to be in a meeting run by you, or do you not run them?
Some I run, others I don't run. I've moved, and I'm going to be moving more of the meetings towards, I'm trying to move our meetings all, when we get together, to really focus on information that we can then use to manage the business going forward. The idea of just getting together for the sake of getting together to talk about stuff, or to just, hey, I need to tell you this or that, and there was a time 10 years ago when we really needed to do that. But now I've started with one, and it's going to happen with another one starting next week, is people kind of come in each area of responsibility, and I give them between 60 and 120 seconds, so 1 to 2 minutes. Put a slide up, 1 or 2 slides, and present the information of relevance to this group that can tell us what's important to you in your area of the business that can help us collectively run the business going forward. So in honing that down and getting the right kind of information is really important. So we have a session where we go through, it's about 30 minutes of that. And if there's a problem that comes up, what I do is I grab that person and anybody else who'd be relevant to solving that problem, and I say, you stick around afterwards, and we're going to have a deeper, 5 or 10 minute conversation about that problem, so that we have an action plan that you go do it this week, so next week you can come back and report about how that's gone. So I'm trying to move our general meetings in that direction.
If you could go back in time with the knowledge and experience you have today to business school and think about what skills do you wish you had focused on more, or had more knowledge of today, I mean, what would those skills be?
Well, you're asking me at a particular time. Now I'm saying I wish I had more marketing training, which I didn't have a lot. University of Chicago, back when U of C was really the quant place, I was a finance and accounting major. And for years I said the best thing I got out of business school was my accounting. So if you want to live in France, you learn French. If you want to really be in business or a CFO or run a business, you've got to know what the numbers are saying. And I think that's a skill that if you're going to be in business, unless you say, hey, I'm just going to be on the marketing side, the knowing accounting is very, very helpful. And I still, to this day, even as the CEO now, I go through our numbers on a very regular basis with our CFO. So the accounting basis, and then I think on the, marketing, understanding the marketing world better would be helpful to me right now.
How do you instill a sense of ethics in your organization, and what can our students do to strengthen their understanding of how to make ethical decisions when they're out there in the business world?
Great question, and it has to come from the top, and you have to walk the walk. And it's saying no to some things that would be a quick buck. It's doing, it's doing the right thing when no one's looking. It's when you have a teachable moment and you say, like, okay, we could do this, but you say, we're not going to do it. And you make that decision in front of people, and they realize, like, that's the harder decision, or that's going to make us less money, but we're going to do it. Or it's being honest in what you put on your labels. It's being consistent in doing that, and then people seeing how you treat other people. It's a fascinating thing for me, running a business, a small to medium-sized business in Massachusetts and Vermont, not necessarily the most hospitable places to business in general. And you have political stuff that swirls out there where they talk about business and this and that, and it amazes me in this day and age that there can be companies that mistreat their employees. I mean, I think with social media, et cetera, I don't know how you run a business where you don't treat your employees fairly. I don't know who would want, But that, it clearly does happen. There are plenty of examples of unethical decisions being made in businesses, like there are labor unions, like there are in politics and everywhere else. I do think you have to, as I said, you lead from the top, and then when you see that kind of behavior, you make a very quick example of it, that it's not going to be tolerated.
So considering that the last 6 years have had lots of economic turmoil that we've all had to deal with, has it changed the way you run your business?
Well, I'll tell you, a couple of interesting things, and I'm not sure I'm going to answer your question, but our business turned up in the fourth quarter of 2008 and stayed up for about 5 straight years, which was pretty interesting. We were actually at a rough late 07, early 08, and then when the market tanked, we actually went up. One of the reasons I was so bullish about doing the ESOP was I'm a huge fan and proponent of the free enterprise, the capitalist system that we have. I don't know, there's none other, in my opinion, that it works with a free society, right? So, or generates wealth like ours does. But what happened in 07, 08 was a real black eye. Now, I don't know, there are a lot of finance people here probably. A lot of that was concentrated in the financial world, on Wall Street. There was a lot of government policies that were stupid and wrong too. But it was a black eye, and you have a generation of people, you guys, who kind of came of age when it's like, they're bailing out the banks, they've screwed us, the 1%, et cetera, et cetera. I can see where it's easy to make the case like, hey, the system's rigged, it's not fair, you know, you don't have a chance to get ahead, and there are these guys in New York, and really, it's mostly New York finance, who are greedy and doing things they shouldn't have done. And unfortunately, there's a very broad brush that gets painted by the media and society where all business is made to appear part of that. I don't like Wall Street any more than the next guy, that Elizabeth Warren likes Wall Street. Maybe not, I don't dislike it as much as she does. But I'm trying to, so when we had the opportunity with this ESOP to kind of say, well, this is how you can run a business. And we're not all greedy jerks. And most of the business men and women that I know are not at all like that. They care a great deal about the people they work with, and about creating opportunity for everybody at their company. So I'm using it a little bit as a soapbox to say, you know, there were bad things that happened. Focus on where those bad things happened. It was not in the general business community. It's not in small business. It was focused on Wall Street with some greedy bankers. And you know what? Greed is bad. I don't care what Gordon Gekko said. Greed is really bad. It's a sin if you want to. We're at BC. I can say sin, right?
Yes.
But greed is not good for the system. Too much greed is a bad thing. And the end result is, you know, it's going to be overreach and greed on the part of business people that give the political will to put damaging regulations and restraints and taxes on the rest of us that don't have anything to do with it. So. Sorry for that long. So how we run our business, I try to be more inclusive, and then at the end of the day, end up giving, you know, half the company to our employees, and the end goal in 5+ years is that they'll get the rest of the company as well.
So a few personal questions before I turn you over to the students. How do you relax in your spare time, and do you have a favorite place to recharge?
Favorite place would be Vermont. One of the, you know, we bought the brewery in Vermont in 2000. Catamount had been one of the 2 breweries, craft microbreweries operating in New England when we started in 1986, along with Geary's up in Portland, Maine. And in 1996, they moved from White River Junction, Vermont. They borrowed some money and spent about $4 to $5 million on a brewery in Windsor, Vermont. In 2000, we bought that brewery from their bank for $1 million. So that's kind of how quickly things can turn. And because we needed the capacity and we wanted to sell more Harpoon in northern New England. So I started to spend a lot of time up there, and I just fell in love with it. We ended up buying a house, and so Vermont would be my place. I love hiking. I love spending time with my family. I love reading. I mean, as an American history major, it's kind of a lifelong avocation of mine. So those 3 things would be, and occasionally I like to go out and have a Harpoon IPA.
It's a good thing. Do you feel like you've achieved balance in your life, and have you had to make any sacrifices to get to this point?
I do. I feel incredibly fortunate. The last couple of, this year has been extraordinarily busy, where the balance has kind of gotten out of skew a little bit. But prior to that, and I'll get back to more of a balance. It works because my youngest just left for college 3 weeks ago, so I'm able to devote more time to work anyhow. But we say that in our mission statement, that we believe in a balanced life for our employees. We're not looking for people to be working every weekend until 9 o'clock every night. That's not a good thing. And so we've tried to, again, model that and say, yeah, we want you here 45 or 50 hours a week and working pretty darn hard if you're in management, but, go off and have a great life.
If you could live your career over again, would you do anything differently?
I might have left that biotech company with that weird guy a little bit earlier. I would have to answer no, I probably wouldn't. And I would say the other thing, going back to what I said earlier, for those of you who are undergrads, summer jobs. I mean, grab them, take the different job, take the risk, learn different things. I don't regret any of the decisions I made and any of the jobs that I had.
If you get to choose another career after this one, what would it be?
Maybe teaching history?
Teaching history.
Yeah, not business. I don't feel qualified to teach business, but history I could talk about.
Okay. Well, we have reached that point where I'm going to turn my chair around and turn it over to you. Questions?
Yes.
You're,
Can I announce that there's somebody, can I just take a second to announce that there's someone in this room who's in a fantasy football league with me, and his team lost to my wife's team this weekend. Sorry, JR, couldn't resist.
Thanks very much for being here. We really appreciate your time. I wanted to maybe hear you talk a little bit more about the ESOP that you implemented, and could you leave any opportunities on the table to maybe go in a different direction and raise a bunch of money and do different things, and what was the decision-making process like?
We did. There's no question. We levered the company to do this ESOP. Now, Rich and I started talking, I probably started talking 3 years ago. I brought up an ESOP as a nice, I said, that kind of feels right to me. We kind of talked, we looked into it a little bit, then put it on a shelf. And then about 15 months ago, Rich said, you know what, I'm really ready for some kind of a transaction, and I wouldn't mind being able to do some different things. So we looked very hard at different options, and he wanted to go down a route more selling to a strategic investor, a private equity, a strategic investor. But taking proceeds and maybe becoming a platform to go and make acquisitions. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to preserve our independence and ultimately turn the company over to the employees. I care more about my employees than I do my grandkids. Don't tell anyone that one, JR. So we did, but being highly levered, whether with an ESOP or not, you're constrained to what you can do. So we're focused for the next several years on growing our business or paying down that debt. So there are trade-offs. Did I answer your question? Yeah. ESOPs are really very complicated things for those of you. I don't know how much knowledge there is out here about ESOPs, but they were put in place with ERISA in the mid-'70s, and they're very highly regulated. So you follow quite a few rules in doing these. You're offered some nice tax benefits on the other hand, especially if you're an S Corp. If you're a 100% ESOP-owned S Corp, you do not pay any federal or state income taxes. So there are compelling reasons to do it because you generate the cash and you can plow it back into the ESOP, but there are real kind of constraints in operations as well.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for coming tonight. It's great. And so we just kind of been on the topic of decision-making a little bit. So I just wanted to follow up on that with how does the decision-making process work within Harpoon Brewery? Is it very lateral, where people put in ideas and then the decisions are being made at different levels? Say, for example, somebody, I don't know, say in the beer hall wanted to comes up with an idea for the next barrel series or something.
Mm-hmm.
How does that, is that something that they can bring up with anyone and then there's a group discussion? Or?
I like to think that we have a culture that anyone can bring up anything. And we have lots of examples of ideas like that where they've come up and they've been discussed. And on the new product, and it's almost easier to explain it right where you asked it. So we have in Boston a 20-gallon brewing system. Then we have a 10-barrel brewing system. Then our main brewing system is 120 barrels. It's an Old English measurement. So our 120 barrels, that's like 1,700 cases, just to give you a sense of scale, right? So we'll have guys come up with, or gals come up with great ideas for beers like, hey, I read about this, or I love this flavor, blah, blah, blah. Can you do a little test batch? So they'll go down and they'll do a 20-gallon batch, and they'll put it into the 1/6 barrel, the kegs, the smaller kegs, and they'll put it on tap in our employee lounge or lunchroom. I know, it's a fun place to be. And then people will try it. And they might send out an email saying, hey, I just put on this, oak-aged honey vice beer in Cafe 306 is what we call it. Give it a try and let us know what you think. And we'll get feedback on that. And it's like, hey, that was really good. Let's do a 10-barrel batch of it, which is about 18 or 20 kegs worth. And then we'll put that on tap in the beer hall. So we'll say, okay, we like this internally. Now let's take it to the next level. Let's put it on tap in the beer hall and in our Riverbend taps up in Vermont, and let's kind of hear what consumers are saying about this. The people come to the brewery like it. And maybe if it really does well, we'll consider for the 100-barrel series. We just did every fall we do an employee outing up to Vermont. And we do what we call the Kettle Cup, which is a homebrew competition. Anyone at the brewery can do a batch of beer on the 20-gallon system or the little one we have in Vermont. We had over 30 entries, different beers that people made. We had to have flights in Boston to whittle it down to 8 from Boston and I think 2 from Vermont. Then on the company outing day, we taste and we vote. And someone won, and the winner there automatically will become a 100-barrel early next year. So I hope that ideas, have a way of percolating up. That way is almost easier. The sales and marketing side is another one where you want to say to people, we're all open to ideas and things that work and experiment with them. Yes.
Thank you for coming as a fellow beer and business enthusiast. It's been really cool. I was wondering, talk about you started the business because of the lack of choice when you went to a bar. But now you go to a bar and you can choose from a million different options. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the change in the industry specifically with the entrance of so many competitors through the lens of business.
It's wild. And first of all, no one here should start a brewery. We know that, right? I'm joking. It's incredible. And it's, people say, well, gee, it's so crazy competitive now. It was so much easier. But as I pointed out earlier, no one had any idea what we were trying to do. We were turned down by wholesalers. They wouldn't carry our product because they're like, you're not going to make it. And we don't, this brown beer is not going to survive in the United States. So different challenge. But back then it was really more about education. You'd go into a bar and the best beer bars might have 6 taps. That was a great thing. And they would typically have, back in the mid-'80s, Guinness, Bass, and Harp, because Bass at that point was imported by Guinness Importing Company. And they might have, Bud, Miller Lite, and Coors on tap. So you had to try to dislodge one of those 6, which was because we came out with draft first before we bottled. So it was a real challenge. The real estate was very limited. Now you go to bars and they have 12, 18, 24 tap lines, and they rotate them so you can kind of get in the queue. For us now, it's the real challenge is, we've got some of the largest craft brewers in the country, the Sam Adams, the Sierra Nevadas, the New Belgiums, that have really become very sophisticated consumer product companies. I mean, you could put Sam Adams, in a category with some of the industry best. I'm not saying they're P&G, but they're a very sophisticated, very good consumer products company, right? So you get those guys. Then you have the legion of the next guys that are Lagunitas and others that have private equity, big-time private equity money behind them. Then at the lower, smaller end, you've got all the nano breweries. You've got, when I started the Mass Brewers Guild, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and there were, I think, 22 breweries in Massachusetts. I think it's north of 90 now. And in the country, we've now well over 3,000. So as a regional player like us, we're facing the battle from those sophisticated consumer product companies like Sam Adams, who are way, way bigger than we are. And now we're facing it neighborhood by neighborhood. I mean, Somerville probably has 2 breweries now. Cambridge might have 2 breweries. Brighton has, So whereas before we would be kind of, hey, we're the Boston brewery. Now it's like, but you're not the Brighton brewery, or you're not the Somerville brewery. So it's very, very competitive. I don't know where this is going to go. It's, the wholesale tier, it's a 3-tier industry: brewery, wholesaler, retailer. And the number of wholesalers in the country in the last 30 years has gone from like, 2,000, 2,500 down to like 900. So you go into these wholesaler warehouses and the number of SKUs they now have to carry is just out of control. And what happened in the 90s, which was there was a real boom in the 90s off a much smaller base, but the industry was growing at 50 to 75% a year versus now it's mid-teens. All of a sudden you started to have old beer on the shelves because no one could control it. The wholesalers couldn't control it in their warehouse. The retailers certainly couldn't control it. And all of a sudden people just said, I'm spending, a pretty penny on a six-pack of this craft brewed beer, and it's old. It doesn't taste good. And so the market just kind of tanked. That's when we ended up buying Catamount at the end of that process. So the beer today is much better than it was 20 years ago. But the number of SKUs, I don't know where that's going in. I don't know what the number is. I mean, there are like 7,000 wineries in the United States. So can there be 7,000 or 8,000 breweries in the United States? Can it be that local of a business? What I fear is we call the winification of craft beer, which is all of a sudden package stores are not going to have, hey, there's the Harpoon shelf, Harpoon IPA, the Rye IPA, the Summer Beer, UFO White, etc. They're going to say, here's my IPA door, here's my Belgian White door, etc. And all of a sudden brands become, you guys are too young to drink much wine or probably care more about beer than wine. But as a wine, I like wine as well as beer. And I find it very hard to gain traction and remember too many brand names with wine. Because it's not, I like Chardonnay or I like Cab, or you do it more by varietal. So it'll be more like, hey, I'm an IPA drinker. I don't care whether it's Harpoon, Lagunitas, Rebel IPA, just give me an IPA. I fear that happening in our industry. Sorry, long answer, but I hope I gave you enough information there. Yes? Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been great listening to you. When you were speaking about the ESOP, was there one company in particular that you came in contact with and you admired their employee program, or did you research into a bunch of different companies, and what industries did you borrow from when developing it?
It was more the latter. We did research into ESOPs as an alternative to get a liquidity event. And the nice thing, again, ESOPs, they give you the liquidity, right? They provide continued independence, but they also provide continuity of management. So kind of for us, it hit all three. As we got into it, though, we discovered a lot of pretty cool companies that were ESOPs. For us, they were local. There are other craft beers that are ESOP. New Belgium's 100% ESOP. Alaskan is an ESOP. I don't know if they're 100%. Deschutes is a small percent that's ESOP. Full Sail is out in ESOP. We've had a couple come to us since who say they're looking at it. But for us, the local guys, King Arthur Flour. If any of you know King Arthur Flour, it's a great company up in the Upper Valley near Hanover, New Hampshire. Webb Industries and Hypotherm, three companies. And there's almost a cult of ESOPs. To do this deal, we had to hire an ESOP advisor who then we had to hire an ESOP counsel because our lawyers didn't know anything about ESOPs. Then we had to hire an ESOP trustee to represent the interests of the employees. That ESOP trustee had to hire their own lawyer and their own valuation firm. We were paying for all those people. So it's complicated, but so we had real help from King Arthur Flour, Hypotherm. You talk to these guys and say, do you know these guys or this guy, are they good? And to the point where Hypotherm, their metal, they do like plasma cutters and that kind of stuff. they're like a 1,000-person, billion-dollar company. They're a real success story. And the guy came in, he flew in from Canada, had another guy take the Dartmouth coach down to Logan to give him this beautiful thing that they'd etched for us, 3-inch thick aluminum bottle cap with our logo on it saying, welcome to the ESOP world. So it's a really warm, kind of cool community of employee owners. And this summer when we did it, we found with the market basket thing, which I found incredibly fascinating, there was a lot of resonance with what we were doing because people were paying attention to the idea of how do you treat your employees and given that backdrop. Yes?
Mr. Kenary, I appreciate you coming here this evening. So based off your other response, I was wondering how do you differentiate yourself with the increase in competition?
It's really hard. And you have to have a very strong brand identity, and then you have to evaluate everything you do through that. We've been Love Beer, Love Life for some time now, and it kind of resonates with who we are as a company. We run a lot of athletic events. We have a lot of festivals at the brewery. We promote kind of the socialization of beer. If you come to our beer hall in the Boston waterfront, which we opened early last year, It's long communal tables. We simply have beer and pretzels. The idea is we're not, there are a lot of what we call beer geeks, and that's actually a positive thing in our industry, who really are all about just the beer and kind of extreme beers, which is great. We make some extreme beers too, but we really are more about the socialization of great beer and bringing people together to celebrate beer with their friends after hiking a mountain or running on a road race or whatever, they're just going out for a fun night. So we try to present that image to the marketplace as to who we are. We're going to have 500,000 people visit our breweries this year, between our breweries and our festivals and the events that we run. So that's a tremendous asset for us to be able to communicate one-on-one with those people and hopefully communicate that message that I described to you, which is this love beer, love life, this active, social-based beer. But it's hard. Yes?
In that light, who do you admire, or who historically would you like to sit down and have beer with?
Ah, that's a great question, isn't it? There's so many people. I mean, I think Abraham Lincoln would be just a fascinating guy to sit down and have a beer with. Richard Nixon. That would just be bizarre, but that would be pretty interesting too. And there's a reason, that's so resonant, the idea of sitting down and having a beer with someone. Thank you for leading in with that. But the concept of that's the social beverage of moderation, that's kind of who we are, certainly resonates with me. But Steve Jobs would be another guy that'd be pretty interesting to sit down and have a beer with. I don't know if you could get him to sit down for long enough to even finish the beer, but how about you?
I think Edison would be interesting. Also Isaac Newton, two pretty smart guys. And Ben Franklin, who's a wisdom
Yeah.
table.
And he liked beer. He was the one that beer is proof that God loves us. Isn't that Ben Franklin's quote? Yes.
So your co-founder and yourself had the business plan for the brew, but then what was the first brew? Like, did you teach yourself how to homebrew?
No, never homebrewed. Hired a brewer. Again, we both came at it from the consuming end. We liked beer and thought there can be a lot better beer here. So we hired a brewer from UCal Davis. They, in the 30s, put in a fermentation sciences program, and 25 people a year would graduate. This is mid-'80s, and 20 would go into winemaking, and 5 would go into brewing, and 3 would go to Anheuser-Busch, and 2 to Miller or Coors. And so we hired a guy, Russ Heisner, from San Jose. He'd never been east of Reno, and we moved him out to Boston. And he had an apartment in Brighton, and he started brewing test batches of Harpoon Ale, which was our first product, kind of a mild English ale, and did test batches, and we would kind of keg it and then have barbecues and stuff down by the river and kind of bring friends and say, what do you think of this beer? And then when we moved into the brewery, he started obviously scaled things up. Yes.
Thanks. My bachelor degree is also history, and I'm personally very interested in American history. So actually, I'm very curious about what's the biggest challenge or benefit you think when you try to work through your own business.
When I try to work through my own
Business,
Yeah, from your background.
from being a
history major,
Yep.
I don't really, I'm a big believer in a liberal arts education. So I think there's a value to being educated, broadly educated, no matter what you do in business. Whether, I refer to our industry as the world's second oldest profession. See if anyone gets that one. But part of the attraction to me about beer is the history of it. I mean, every spring we do an employee beer culture trip to Europe. We take employees when they hit their 5th anniversary, 8th, 12th, and every 5 years after that, we take them to Europe for a week, drinking beer, visiting breweries, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's up to between 20 and 25 people on each of these trips. And we've gone to breweries that are 600 years old. And you realize how deeply ingrained in the fabric, the brewery is and the community, et cetera. So being a history major makes everything more interesting to me. I mean, I kind of drive my friends crazy after once in a while because, you're traveling and you just know this and that, and it's completely useless information. But I like it. So And in our industry, I think you know, having a respect for history and realizing that there's very little you're doing that's never been done before means you're kind of open, I think, to learning from other people as opposed to feeling, hey, I got to create everything from scratch all the time. Maybe I've never been asked that question before, but I guess that's how I'd answer it. Yes?
Thank you very much for coming. I have a question for you since you had said marketing was kind of the Achilles heel. Have you seen your customer acquisition costs increase or decrease over time? Because you have a lot of new entrants into the field, but you also have the power of social media now, like Twitter and Facebook and a lot of those other ones. So how has that changed your business plan? And do you see it's more expensive or cheaper now to acquire those target customers?
That's a great question, and I really don't have an answer for you. I mean, it's really because we've never quantified that specifically. You can do it more now than you ever could with the digital media, digital marketing efforts, but in the past, you know, you'd say, okay, our marketing effort was largely built around our festivals and our promotion events. So you say, okay, what's it cost us to put on this Oktoberfest this weekend? You have a revenue number associated with the event itself, but how much additional business beyond not counting the festival, how much additional business in the next 6 months is going to result from that? That's the frustrating thing about marketing, right? That's one of the benefits, again, I think, with social media, because you can get a per hit number. And you put a billboard up on the Southeast Expressway and say, well, they tell you you're going to be 3 million eyeballs on that every day. Okay. And what did it do to our sales? I don't know. So it's a very amorphous world that we live in. So I don't really have an answer to your question. I think social media in general is driving those costs down. I'd have to think that it is, but I don't have a number for you to say, you know, 10 years ago it was $12 and now it's 13 cents. I don't know that because we weren't able to track that number now, and we don't do enough market research. We're going to be doing more to really judge the effectiveness of some of the things that we do. So an Achilles heel, I meant that personally, I didn't study a lot of marketing in business school. That was an answer to that question. And I'm now responsible for the marketing of the company. I've much smarter people than me doing it, but I'm ultimately responsible. So I kind of wish I knew more. Yes?
So again, thanks Dan for coming. It's great to hear from you, and some of you are some of my favorites, so that's always exciting to have.
Thank you.
And also great to see history majors in high business. It gives me hope for the future. But either way, my question is comes to that you chose to start this and go after a passion, which is beer. And when you've been sort of deciding your career moves, it sounds like you've had other options in finance and biotech. How much of your decisions have been based on your passion for the product versus your passion for different functional areas, and how do you weigh those different and sometimes competing forces as you make career decisions?
The first time around, it was as much, you know, I started by knowing I wanted to get out of banking. And so the appeal of, you know, you're 25 and this wow, you can start, let's start our own company. There's a sexiness and appeal to that resonated. Let's go. Now's the time to try this without a great deal of knowledge of any of what that meant. I mean, if you had said to me in 1987 that I'd be here today and Harpoon would have 200 full-time, I would have dismissed that. I didn't think beyond, you know, the next year or two. The second time around, when I was in biotech coming back, I realized I really had left my heart at Harpoon. You know, having started it, it was always part of me, and I stayed very close with Rich, helping him raise money, going to a lot of meetings, et cetera, so that when he said, I recognized that there was a real need in the business for someone like me, and I'm like, how am I going to feel if somebody, you know, if we hire someone else and that door is really permanently closed? And it was a risky thing. You imagine at that point I had 4 kids, going back to my wife and saying, I seem to be kind of set on this career path, but what do you think if I kind of jump back in this direction and take on all this kind of risk again? And fortunately, she's great about it. So once you get into general management and you like it, it's pretty hard to be satisfied doing anything else. A great thing about our business too, you know, when I was in biotech, I really loved biotech because you're around really smart people doing cool stuff that's actually good for society if it works out, and you'll learn a ton. They're way smarter than you are, these scientists. You don't even really understand what they're talking about a lot of the time. But Great thing about beer is that, for a 200-person company, we've got raw materials. We have grain, malted barley coming in the front door that we put through the brewing process, fermentation, conditioning, filtration. We package it. We have a warehouse. We have our own distribution business in Boston. We sell almost 25% of our business in Boston. We put it on trucks. We've got sales guys going out taking orders. Then we ship to 110 wholesalers around the country. So we have a marketing department, a sales department. So for a relatively small business, we kind of have it all, which I love. A typical day, of going and, well, I'm going to smell hops to select for the next year's season. We're tasting a different brew, or we're tasting a beer that someone said is off from 90 days ago. Or, I'm going into a marketing meeting where we're talking about a campaign or a Harpoon Helps program. We're going to raise some money for a charity, or going into a sales meeting to motivate some wholesale. I have a great mix of things, which I don't know, I've never been diagnosed ADD, but it actually works really well with my personality to kind of be able to jump around to those things. And I find it interesting and very, very challenging. Still. Yes?
Hi, I'm Kenary. So thank you for sharing all the insights on business management. One of the things you mentioned that I found really inspiring was to not do list. And it's my understanding that in earlier stage of your life, you go through the process of accumulation where you accumulate knowledge and
Yeah.
experience, and then you reach a later stage where you start doing deduction, or at least you try to refine your focus due to limited time and energy. So I'm interested in learning at this stage of your life, what are some of the things you're trying to deduct from your life besides thinking with the internet?
Given the changes this year that I've talked about, I had to give up quite a bit of my things on the operating side of the business and just give those to other people, things I've been doing for years. One of the things that happens in a job is you get comfortable doing things. It's like, gee, I've been doing this for a while, I'm good at it, I like it. It's like, what else am I going to do? And some people it becomes a job security issue. It's like, gee, and you run into this a lot in bureaucracies where I could give you your permit today, but my gosh, I don't have anything to do for the next 2 days, and so that wouldn't look good, and I might lose my job. But you do get kind of comfortable doing certain things, and I think as you move up that ladder and you're making more money and you're taking on more responsibility, you just have to ask, is this the best use of my time and talent? I'm having to ask myself that question a lot. Like the way that I spend my time, I'm getting to know almost 100 new people at our company. I knew them, we're not that big, but on the sales and marketing side, I need to immerse myself in that. So I needed to set up things on operations that I could just give those things up and have other people take it and take that leap of faith that the beer is going to be made the way it should be made and be available when we need it. So it's an ongoing process, and I find that I sometimes have to force myself to do it more than other times where it's just I'm so overwhelmed I have to stop. I think the better decisions are made when you do it proactively and you actually look at maybe it's an annual thing, you kind of look at how am I spending my time? Are these 3 things I should continue to do, or should they go to somebody else? Yes, sir.
Mr. Kenary, thank you so much for coming. Knowing how much Harpoon depends upon word of mouth, and you discuss marketing, I want to get your thoughts on marketing in the traditional sense as in advertisements and TV commercials, and how we always see on the Super Bowl Bud Light and Miller Lite. I just wanted to get your thoughts on how does that play into Harpoon, and why don't we see any Harpoon commercials on TV?
Well, they're too expensive, number one. But TV is an interesting thing. Sam Adams has been very effective with their TV, and they've been very targeted in the message they're trying to deliver, which is we are a craft brewery. Because they've recognized, as Jim Koch has become a billionaire and they're a multi-billion-dollar company, that they risk kind of losing that street cred. So if you watch their ads, you kind of see very deliberately what they're doing, and they've been very successful at it. So it's not to say we wouldn't like to do it, but it's one of those, it's a very expensive medium to get into. The production costs are very expensive. You have to commit a lot of resources to it. So to do it on a small basis, you're almost guaranteeing that you're not going to be successful. There's also another aspect of it, and the reason I mentioned Sam is because they've avoided this pitfall, but you can appear too big all of a sudden if you're on TV. It's like, oh, we thought this was our little local brewery, and gee, they're on TV, they must be big. They're like Budweiser or something. So it's never had that much appeal to us. We have, as I said earlier, we're going to have 500,000 people come and see us this year. For a business of our size, that's pretty extraordinary. that's a tremendous opportunity for us. I don't think we're doing nearly the job that we need to do with those 500,000 people, let alone the other folks who we kind of reach through word of mouth. We don't do enough market research on those folks. We don't give them, we give them great experiences, otherwise they wouldn't come back. But we don't do enough to turn them into brand ambassadors, which is kind of going to be one of our real focus in 2015. Yes, sir.
Hi, Dan. I'm Eric Kay. Every year I do the Harpoon 5-miler.
Thank you for doing that.
If you want to look at photos, you can see that I've had a good time.
I'm usually at the very, very end finishing that race. We raised about $200,000 this year for Lou Gehrig's disease. That's what Eric's talking about, so thank you for doing that.
I'll put it on my calendar every year. So my question is, you talked about a few things, the races, the beer hall, this weekend, the Oktoberfest. Can you tell us about the reason behind having these events and bringing more people in to Harpoon? It feels like a really unique thing for a brewery. And what is the message that you're trying to get across to people who are coming in to participate in these events?
I'll give you two stories. The first, which is always a good thing, it's always good to me when you can go back to your founding document, in this case our business plan, and find that you're still following it. And one of the things that's in our business plan, we not only wanted to make great local beer, but we wanted to make our breweries a showcase of what we do. Because the idea was, in traveling in Europe, not only did you find these great different regional and local beer styles, but also like the breweries were right in the center of town. They were kind of really part of the fabric of the community. And you'd go on a tour and they'd meet these great guys. You go to Germany and they had beer delivery people. They'd come every Friday like the milkman and they'd deliver your beer and they'd take away your empties. So that has always been part of who we are. The only space in our existing brewery in Boston, we started with 5,200 square feet, and now we have about 47,000 square feet. The only space that has been used for the same purpose since the day we opened is our tour room. So we've been all about getting people to visit us. That location where we are, show of hands, people been to the brewery, know where the brewery is? So you have a sense of where we are in the waterfront. When we went down there 28 years ago, the only people down there were like Whitey Bulger and these hoodlums. It was a crappy part of town. It's the old naval annex. But we wanted our location to be close to downtown, a visible spot where people could come see us. The other location we were looking at was down in an industrial park in Hyde Park. And we delayed, and for those of you who've started companies know how costly this was, we were delayed for 6 months to get the location we have now. At a very costly time. We had no revenue coming in, but I'd quit my job, and George and Rich had graduated from Harvard Business School. We were paying ourselves like $12,000 or $18,000 a year, but it was eating through our capital. But it was one of the best decisions we ever made. So from day one, we've been about bringing people to our breweries. The event story was, and this credit goes really to my partner, Rich, in 1990, we were really on the ropes. And Rich said, you know what? If we're going to go out of business, before we go out of business, we're going to have an Oktoberfest. We're going to have a big party. So kind of like on credit, got a tent, and had an Oktoberfest. This weekend's our 25th annual Oktoberfest. So, and it was a home run. And so that's really where the idea of these events started. What brewery worth its name, you got to have an Oktoberfest. So we had one, and over the years, it's grown to where, as I said, we had 19,000 people last year, and we have people coming up from New York and Washington. It's really kind of achieved a status as a great weekend event. And we've added to them over the years, and we've not only added other beer-centric festivals. We have a barbecue festival in Vermont. We do another Oktoberfest in Vermont. But as you participate in, Eric, we do the Harpoon Fest in May, and we've tacked on the Sunday this road race. We had 4,000 runners, and I think it fills up in about 20 minutes on the internet to get into this thing. The combination of exercise, supporting a good cause, and drinking beer, those things really work for people. I mean, you can kind of see why. And so that's a great event. And we do another ride, a point-to-point ride in Vermont. It's the largest single fundraiser for the Vermont Food Bank, a biking event up there. And again, that kind of works with who we are as a brewery. We're really community focused, and so we raise money for great causes, and we bring people to the brewery, and we get to meet them. Yes?
Thanks again. Kind of building on that day one foundation, is there any funny story we can share with people outside the classroom about Where did that come from?
Yeah, I wish there was. No, you know, it was. I can remember the day. It was Rich. Rich came out of taking a shower, came out and said, "You know what? I had an idea in the shower. What about the name Harpoon?" And it was like boom. And we'd been doing research. I'd gone down and spent like a day at the Mystic Seaport. We knew we wanted waterfront, right? We wanted something kind of with historical connotations. We wanted something, 2 syllables is great, and something that could have some nice imagery around it. So I remember going down to the Mystic Seaport Library and just kind of pouring through books, you know, like the Great Atlantic Brewing Company, named after old ships and all this kind of stuff. So we had done enough back work on that so that when he came up with that, it was like, that is absolutely a great name for us. And then we had a friend who started to do some of the design work, and we've never regretted that decision. And people have come up with stuff over the years, oh, it had to do with Harvard, nothing to do with that at all. It really was more of a waterfront, New England-focused name. Yes, sir.
Oh, well, first, thank you for this.
You guys are really polite. You're all very welcome. Thank you for being so polite.
So my question is, because of the fact that when Harpoon Brewery first started out, you were offering a product that was so different from most of the things on the market, did you have a hard time finding suppliers that catered to your product-specific needs?
You know, the main thing that we needed was specialty malt, and there are enough still specialty malt suppliers out there. We didn't need that much. So we were able to find those guys without too much difficulty. Caramel malt, black malt, chocolate malt. You know, the hop, the aroma hop craze, I mean, we were among the leaders in starting that 20 years ago, but that was not so much of an 80s thing. It was a little bit of an 80s thing, but that really kind of took off in the 90s. Hop growing is challenging because it can take several years to kind of really develop a crop. So the supply and demand can get out of whack on that, and so that took some time. Hops were more of a challenge than the specialty malts, and now we use all kinds of fun things in our beers. So there's a good industry supply in the craft brewing industry today.
Thank you again, sir. I have a question about your ESOP program. It sounds like you had a really good family background. You had said about your wife being supportive and your kids. What did your family think when you were doing the ESOP? Because you have 4 children that have now heard that you're turning the company over to the employees. I have to imagine there was probably some honest, candid responses you had back and forth. You might have spoken some of that.
What have you heard, JR? JR is best friends with one of my kids, so he kind of has heard some of this. But, you know, a couple of my boys have made it pretty clear to me that they would love to get into the business. Fortunately, my daughter's in med school, and I don't think Michael's that interested. But I've made it very clear to them, I'm not a huge fan of family businesses. There's some wonderful family businesses out there. I've seen it happen too often where the family relationships get messed up. I don't want my kids to be comparing themselves to me. I want them to chart their own course. I'm incredibly excited about what these guys are going to do. And I think you can complicate it if you kind of bring them into the business, because I don't know how you separate the two. And there's also my wife's family. They had a family business for 3 generations that, I mean, it ended profitably for them, but there were some things that happened along the way that were really unpleasant. So that's kind of reinforced on that side. So you mentioned, I think she's delighted that they will most likely not be going to the business. The ESOP doesn't foreclose that. They could conceivably, if it worked, come into the business, but I've again made very clear to them, go off and do your own thing and do not plan on this. I think with the ESOP, again, I could have just, if I had said yes, we would have sold the company and I would never have another financial worry in the world. So that was an interesting conversation with my wife, who's been just so loyal and supportive for 28 years. And she was right there with me saying, you know what, let's do the right thing here. And we're not going to feel right. As I said to myself, you know, so it's 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, I'm driving down to the waterfront and, oh, there's where Harpoon used to be. Or, gee, they've kept open a little bit of this thing, but they've let 150 of the people that I knew and loved go. And I'm wealthy. That's great. But I hope those other folks landed on their feet. That wasn't going to pass it. And that didn't pass it with her either. So it was a very challenging 6 months getting the deal done, but she was right there with me the whole way. And I couldn't have done it without her. If I didn't have her on this thing, I couldn't have done it, because the other option would have been the easier option. And the same thing for my kids. You know, they kind of saw this as a complicating thing going forward, and they were like, Dad, I'm so proud of you. That just feels so right. They love a lot of the people who work at the brewery, too.
Any more questions? When are you going to get another opportunity to talk to the CEO of Harpoon Brewery? Got time for a few more? Anybody? Yes.
I love your pretzels.
Oh.
I'm not the only one who says that, though all the people in my section have heard me talk about it already. But, you know, the beer hall being a relatively new part of Harpoon, talk about the thought process there. Give us the recipe, maybe? I don't know.
You know, in a lot of ways, the beer hall is kind of the culmination of that vision I talked about in answering Eric's question, with the idea of what our breweries mean to us as far as our marketing. That's one of those projects that kind of came out really how we hoped it would come out. The space looks and feels, you know, inviting, warm, comfortable. The pretzel decision is kind of an interesting one, kind of an interesting business decision. People, why don't you do food? Why don't you do more food? Why don't you do pizza? You know? And that gets back to branding and the importance of being disciplined in the decisions that you make. I don't want to be in the restaurant business. I love having a beer hall. I don't want to compete with our accounts. We want to be known for our beer and for the sociability of our beer, which is what that space provides. And we need to have some food offering. We want to have something so that people can sit and enjoy themselves. And we use spent grain in the recipe to make our pretzels. And it's like, let's do this really, really well. And let's turn this into a unique venue in Boston. There are no TVs, and all you can get are pretzels. It's pretty simple, but I think it's pretty powerful, and it resonates with who we are. But that was one of those decisions, just saying no, and having the discipline to say, no, we're going to stay focused on just doing these 2 or 3 things really well, because we can never let the tail wag the dog here. We're about the Harpoon brand. We're not about operating a bar or restaurant in the city of Boston.
As a company, and I'm just wondering if there's an explicit list of core values that you guys kind of have.
We do. We've gone through that process a couple of times. I think we went through it the last time maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where we kind of put out our external vision and our internal vision about who we are. And we do. It's posted in that right next to the taps in our employee lunchroom. Those things that we try to live by, we all signed it and hold each other accountable. And again, that's helped us make decisions over the years, where we've said, well, wait, it's up on the board there about this is what our objective is here, and we're not living up to that. So we do have it. Sometimes you can just go through the exercise and things, and it's really, that's the easy part. The easy part's coming up with the list. The hard part is kind of making sure that that's alive and you actually live by it going forward. And if you don't have each other, you're not accountable to each other, I don't know, that can't be a top-down thing. Yes?
A lot of craft breweries have gone to using cans now. How was that decision-making process and saying, like, okay, we're going to do that as well?
I love cans. I've become a huge convert. I was in Vermont shopping for buying a little beer for JR's friend Michael. And I couldn't get cans, and I was really frustrated about it. I'm like, gosh, the world has really changed. The way we did it was, for 3 summers, we brewed our beer at either Vermont or Boston. We shipped it to FX Mat up in Utica, New York, and they canned it for us. Because we didn't have the canning, and we thought, you know what, let's see if we can figure this out, and we like it. It's kind of the way that we try to do things at Harpoon if we can. And then after the 3rd year, where sales were really strong, and we felt comfortable making some solid projections, then you kind of flip it over into an ROI analysis, and you bring the CFO into the equation and say, okay, we want to do this in-house because we think the beer is going to be better. And actually, as it turns out, we can save about $2 a case on it. So you do the ROI analysis and say, gee, we can pay for this canning line now in the next 6 years. So we then made the decision, and we just commissioned our line 1.5 years ago. We installed a completely new canning line, and now we're offering it year-round, and cans are the hot package. We're doing, you know, IPA, UFO White, and now all of our seasonals and our cider in cans, and it's a great, the quality, you know, of cans has improved pretty dramatically in the last 20 years. It really had been You know, in the 20 years ago, you had the liners of cans weren't as good, so you had a little bit more of that metallic flavor come off. In addition, you couldn't get the air levels down in the top of the can before you went through the seamer. Two things that are bad for beer are air and light. It's why amber glass is the only glass you should buy a beer in. And when we're bottling, we do a double pre-evac. We inject the bottle with CO2, create a vacuum, fill it with beer, and then you have a jetter that jets a little stream of hot water into the top of the bottle to cause it to foam, to push any air out of the top. Then you cap it. Canning, you fill and you've got a bigger opening, right? You're like, that's a lot of air. You drop down some nitrogen. You create like a blanket of nitrogen. You try to on the top of that can, and then you seam it to try, again, the battle to keep the air out. But you don't have any light issues. So if you can keep your airs low in your cans and have a good seamer, you don't have any light issues. The quality of a can can actually be better than the quality of a bottle as far as the aging process, assuming the beer's the same going in, which it is. So cans are great. I mean, a lot of venues, it started out with, hey, golfing, boating, hiking, etc. These are things you can only use cans for. And now it's just general ease. With everybody recycling, it's a heck of a lot easier to crush a can and put it in a bag and bring it to the dump than it is to have to lug bottles around. So, sorry, long answer to your question, but.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
And I want to offer thanks for putting on the point-to-point ride. I'm a veteran of the ride.
Thank you. 100 mile, 50, or 25? What'd you do?
50.
Good for you. Every ride in Vermont is hard. Yeah.
But my question goes to, you said sort of during your R&R time you like to read. Is there an influential text, maybe staying away from like religious slighted text, that you could share with us that's been a text that's been very influential to you, be it from your time exploring American history or related to business management?
Great question. You know, I don't know if I can name one. I love biographies, and I think in business, you know, you pick up a lot of things from biographies. I'm actually listening to Nelson Mandela's book on his Long Walk to Freedom on tape right now, and someone recommended that to me as a business book, just talking about leadership styles. And you know, it's a great, so he's such an inspirational man regardless, but you know, one of the things he talks about is a leader acting more like a shepherd. And the spade work you got to do to kind of build up the trust to have kind of people follow you. So I would say I've gotten more inspiration over the years, you know, reading biographies of people like Andrew Jackson and Ulysses S. Grant and Nelson Mandela and other great, interesting people throughout history. Those would be probably where I've gotten most of my relevant points that I've brought into the business world as far as leadership is concerned.
So I hope you'll join us down in the lobby down in Fulton. Let's thank Dan for coming this afternoon.